Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. And my name is James Fahn. I'm the Executive Director of Internews' Earth Journalism Network, also a lecturer at UC Berkeley. And on behalf of Internews and EJN and the Oak Foundation, we're very pleased you can join us for this discussion on GeoJournalism, a new way to combine data, maps, and online storytelling. And may I add, we're also very happy to serve as your entertainment while you munch your lunch. We're very pleased we've been able to gather a stellar panel of experts in this new field of geojournalism. Their bios are online, so I'm not going to take a long time to introduce them. In fact, what I'll do is I'll just quickly turn it over to each of them to speak loudly and introduce yourselves, where you're from, and who you are. Yeah?
South Asian online magazine called the thirdfold.net, which is a product of Internews Earth Journalism Network and China Dialogue. I do some kind of geojournalism stuff there. Yeah, I think I got it.
Go ahead, Fiona.
Hi, I'm not sure if this is working, but anyway, if you can hear me, I'm Fiona McLeod. I'm from the Oxpeckers Center for Investigative Environmental Journalism, and I'm from South Africa.
All right, my name is David Akana. I'm Cameroonian. All right, okay. Well, my name is David Akana. I am Cameroonian. I manage InfoCongo, which is pretty much a news platform, interactive mapping news platform for the Congo Basin. So good to be with you guys. Thanks.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Gustavo Faleiros from Brazil, and I'm the editor of Info Amazonia, which covers the 9 countries of the Amazon Basin, and I also work directly with EJN as the manager of the network.
Hi everyone, my name is Willie Schubert. I'm the program officer for the Earth Journalism Network, and my job is to support all of the activities of this community of environmental reporters and help set up all of these various sites throughout the world.
Hello everyone, I'm Clara Rondonu. I'm Indonesian. I'm managing the equatorial website. It's the GeoJournalism website for Indonesia.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to begin. If we no, can we get the PowerPoint presentation up, please? I just want to begin with an introduction of the Earth Journalism Network and who we are. We are a global community of over 8,000 journalists around the world who cover environmental issues. Our mission is to improve the quantity and quality of environmental coverage. Is it here? Your presentation? Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, so we've been around now for 11 years. Our members come from over 120 countries, and one of our activities we've brought 40 journalists from around the world here to the Climate Summit. And in fact, many of them are here in the room. They won a competition from over 500 journalists applied for these fellowships, and these were the people who were selected. If any of our EJN fellows, can you please stand up? Let everyone see who you are. Yeah, there's Giovanna. Okay, I thought we'd have more, but anyway, we got a bunch here in the front of the room. Over the last 11 years, we've trained over 4,500 journalists in a wide variety of environmental issues, a lot of training on climate change, obviously, and those journalists have produced over 5,000 stories just during our activities. The idea is, of course, that they go back to their local media organizations and continue to report on environmental issues. And in doing so, they've had real impacts on the ground. I'm not going to go into all the things they've done, but we believe that, a healthy and functioning environmental journalism press corps is a really vital part of moving towards sustainable development. We do a range of activities. We give out grants and fellowships. We do a lot of training, capacity building. We work with local networks of environmental journalists, so we're not just a network of individuals, we're also a network of networks. And we do geojournalism. You're going to learn a lot more about that this afternoon. What brings this all together is, of course, the stories. That's the main thing we're about, is story production. And that is our craft, and what we aim to do is tell stories about the environment that makes a difference in the real world. So we have a lot of speakers, and we want to hear from each of them, and we also want to leave time for you to ask questions. So without further ado, I'm going to call them up to begin talking, beginning with Gustavo. Do you want to come on up?
Okay, thank you, James. So I'm going to speak to you about InfoAmazonia. InfoAmazonia is the platform that I manage, and I'm based in Brazil. Sorry. And what we do in InfoAmazonia is covering the 9 countries of the Amazon. And that was really the first challenge that we had, because how do you report about an environment like this? I'm just showing this picture to illustrate and the complexity of this environment. You don't actually can see, but there's small boats in this river. Now, what's the story behind an environment like that, which is, as I said, has 9 countries, more than 30 million people living there, various challenges. So our aim was telling this story with the fairness and the scale that it has. So we started this realizing that we could do 2 things. One thing, it was aggregating lots of data that were available. So we started doing things like this that were not so evident, like putting together different data sets from different countries. So this is a map of deforestation of the 9 countries of the Amazon, representing over 25 years of deforestation, mainly for Brazil that has a database, but also includes then Peru, Bolivia, and the other countries. And you would do things like this, which is a data visualization of 2 years of forest fires, which required us learning about how to manage data sets and doing beautiful visualizations, which is part of this geojournalism thing, working with data visualization to tell a good story and representing sometimes in a map, sometimes in a graph. But as James said, our main goal is to produce stories. So the thing that we realized we could do good with the geographical data and the maps, it was giving great context for the stories. And at the same time, we believe that our stories can give context to the data. So it's like a dialogue between stories and data. That's what we're searching with geojournalism. So here's an example of a story about forest fires within an indigenous territory in Brazil. So you can see inside how is the situation of deforestation on this land. So what we really want to do, again, is going through this macro level of seeing the Earth from the sky with satellites to something that's very localized, like an indigenous territory or even a city. So that's why also part of this work is forming this network of journalists of the Amazon region, training them on how to use maps, how to use data, sometimes how to go on the field using a GPS, geotagging their pictures, to creating stories like this. But then we are now going a little bit further and partnering with organizations and scientists also to tell their stories. So this one is our example of work that we've done with a scientist based in the King's College London, where he created a model which predicts the end of the Amazon in 2160, right? So we did this quick visualization which shows the forest shrinking. We start doing more in-depth reporting as well, even spending months. We launched this year this study, which spent 6 months looking at the budget of deforestation of the two governments, the last term of Lula da Silva of Brazil, and the current president of Brazil, Dilma. So the image, I think, speaks for itself. That gave us a lot of problem with the government. They don't agree with our results, but, well, we spent 6 months looking at the open data. Is there data? And we got to this conclusion. Anyway, here we are. So we show with this study there was a 72% decrease on the current government of investment to stop deforestation. And we also partnering with citizen scientists and citizen journalists to do their telling their stories. This is our most recent product, which is an indigenous calendar, which tells the story about their perception of climate and weather. So I won't have time to explain all the details of this product, but you can find it on the internet. But it tells how the indigenous look at the river and decide what days of the year they need to fish or to cultivate their crops. And they still relate this with the constellations. So you can see the constellations, the indigenous constellations in the middle. And by this way, they create the name of their season. So this is the season of the summer of the python, for example, or this is the season of the jaguar, or something like this. They look at the sky, feel the weather. If the river is too dry, they decide how to call the season. So they don't have the same seasons every year. It changes according to the weather. So this kind of work that we're heading to, when we're talking about geojournalism, I think we don't talk about just like maps or like a marker on the map, which might look like this, but we're actually giving context to the data. That's what we're trying to do. And finally, to finish, I'm just going to show this where we're trying to be a little bit ambitious. We actually collecting data ourselves. So we won an award from Google last year in Brazil to build a water quality sensor for the Amazon. We managed to make the case that the Amazon, besides being the place in the world that has more fresh water, is one of the places with the worst water quality in Brazil, at least. People are getting sick of getting water directly from the rivers. So we want to build a case, we want to build a story, actually, of collecting data ourselves where there's no publicly service collecting data to show what's the quality of the water. So more to come on this project, but that's where we're heading to. Thank you.
Thank you, Gustavo. And Info Amazonia is really one of the pioneers of geojournalism. It was launched back in 2012 at the Rio Plus 20 Summit. One of the most recent platforms developed is InfoCongo, and to talk about that is David Akana.
Thank you, James. So good afternoon, everyone. We're actually the new kid on the block, more or less, and we got our inspiration essentially from Gustavo. And even though we might sort of have some similarities in name, meaning that Info Amazonia and InfoCongo, we actually adapted to the realities of the Central African region, which is a very French, pretty much on the linguistic side, a French-speaking region. So we have a very vibrant French page, and if you get a chance to take a look, please visit the French page and don't have to worry that it's essentially in English. No, not at all. So with the exact reasons that might have motivated a project like this one in the Amazon basin are essentially the same reasons that motivated the creation of the project in the Congo basin. As you would know, the Congo basin, it's huge in terms of forests. You might exactly understand that forest loss in the Congo basin is estimated at 1.5 million hectares of forest cover. That's forest cover every year. About 1/3 of 4 million hectares of forest destruction that Africa faces almost every single year. The DRC, which is the biggest, of course, of the countries in the region, contains close to 12.5% of the world's remaining tropical forests. And information on forest loss and forest gain is contained in several repositories, as you may know. For some, this is, of course, I understand you guys are pretty familiar with this. CARPE, which is the Central African Regional Program on the Environment. It's a USAID project. Moabi, Global Forest Watch, they all contain, or these platforms all contain a lot of data. And I'm talking about maps and data on forest. And so what we've essentially done is, pulled out some of that data, given it some meaning, and then combined that with stories on the ground. So essentially, that's what we try to do. This is, for instance, an example of a map on deforestation. So this map essentially tracks deforestation in the last 10 years. I think it's from 2001. Is that right, Gustavo? Up until 2000, and it's pretty much updated up until 2015. So what we do with this map, this is just a screenshot of the map. It's quite interactive. So if you move your cursor around that, you can see exactly forest gain or forest loss in the 6 countries that we work in. By the way, just step back a little bit to say that InfoCongo is actually focusing only on 6 countries of the overall basin. And we are not focusing on Rwanda, Burundi at this point. Uganda as well, we've left that out at the moment. But it's just a strategic decision. Down the road, we intend to work in these areas as well. So this is just an example of a map that we're actually using. I hope it doesn't look pretty abstract, but if you were actually moving on that, you can actually see the state of deforestation in the region. And like I said, we combine this with stories. This is an example of a page with stories. This is in French, of course, and you might see that these are recent stories. It's essentially focused on the ongoing climate conference here in Paris. So we do a lot of that as well. But as a new concept, which is sort of a new paradigm in the way we report stories, you would imagine that this is pretty challenging, right? If even for us, managing this is pretty challenging. Obviously, for the journalists in the region, it's still a huge challenge. So we've actually been on the ground. We were actually there last August 26th to launch this project. We had a full room with many conservation organizations, but also a lot of the civil society out there and the media. They all participated. But this is just a photograph of one of the training sessions we did, and essentially this was just introducing the overall concept to journalists on the ground, and it was well received, and for most part, they're actually working on that at this point. This is also another training. This is, of course, just a complimentary training program coming out of the Oak Foundation, where we're actually having to do some webinars on the INDCs of Côte d'Ivoire, of the Ivory Coast, sorry, I live in the Ivory Coast, right? So in the DRC. So this is a webinar. This, the fellow sitting right here, it's one of the experts we brought in to be able to speak about this. So journalists sort of ask him questions about the overall INDCs of the Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, and then we had journalists from the region participating. So that's part of the capacity building component of the work that we do. So essentially, that's just what we are doing at this point. We're actually moving into 2016 with the hope of continuing to strengthen capacity in the region, continue reporting as well. And so we're actually putting in place a network of journalists in the region. And we have quite a good number working in all the 6 capitals. That's Bangui, Gabon, Libreville, Kinshasa, Yaoundé, and we're actually looking at someone working in Equatorial Guinea. And if you do have any proposals for us, please, we're more than happy to welcome that as well. But in the meantime, we're actually looking at that. We would actually continue on the capacity building stream as well. We have a couple of training sessions, one of them in Yaoundé. And the overall reason is that we need to make sure that the journalists absolutely understand the stake both on the technical side of this new technology of reporting. So we'll be doing a lot of that. I'd rather leave a lot of time for conversation. If there are any questions, please, we're more than happy to take that once we're done with this. Thanks, appreciate it.
Thank you, David. And next up, another platform from Africa, this one from South Africa. Fiona, you want to come up and talk about Oxpeckers?
Hi, so the Oxpeckers Investigative Environmental Journalism Center is based in South Africa. We're a network of journalists who work under this rubric, which relates to a little brown bird that removes parasites from wild animals in Africa. So that's where Oxpeckers comes from. One of our chief mandates is to combine geojournalism and data journalism with traditional investigative journalism techniques. So we've done that in a number of platforms. In the top left-hand corner here, you will see a mapping platform that has taken statistics on rhino poaching incidents and arrests and mapped them into a format where at the click of a button you can get information on what's going on in terms of the rhino poaching issue in South Africa, well, in Southern Africa. On the right-hand side, we followed that up with data on rhino poaching court cases, and we keep updating this data so that people can keep in touch with what's going on there. In the bottom left-hand corner, we've set up a mapping platform for environmental impact assessments, where people who participate in that are able to keep track of what's going on in their neighborhood, licenses and applications for developments. We keep updating that data. And we're working on a similar platform on the right-hand corner for mining licenses in South Africa. So those are some of the projects that we've worked on using geojournalism. When we started thinking about climate change and COP21, we encountered some scientific data that was produced by the South African government and various scientific agencies associated with the government in a very lengthy document called the Long-Term Adaptation Scenarios for Southern Africa. It's very interesting. It gives projections on what's going to happen to the climate and rainfall patterns from until, I think, 2099. But it's a document that's 136 pages or more long. And it's got a lot of maps, which, of course, grabbed my attention. The problem is, how do you access that information? It's based on scientific modeling. And, this is what it looks like. So people like you and me or lay people can't really understand what the scientific data is conveying. So we took that scientific data and we developed a geojournalism platform called Climate Tracker. We did that with the cooperation and support of the Earth Journalism Network. Sorry, James. We filtered the data into a platform which, as you see here, we've got a climate timeline. This is one tracking the temperature rises from the scientific data into a click of the button platform that just shows how, in various areas of Southern Africa, the temperature will change between 1971 and 2099. It's based on the worst case scenarios. So as you can see, it's going to get jolly hot. It already is very hot in that part of the world, but it's going to get jolly hot, a lot hotter. And this is about the rainfall changes. Once again, just wait for the button to start moving. And it gets drier in some areas and wetter in other areas. So that's taking a huge amount of scientific data and putting it into a format which people are able to understand easily. Then what we've done is used that platform and combined it with stories which tell the stories, of climate change. Like South Africa had the hottest temperature in October in the world ever. Here's one about 2015 is the hottest year ever recorded. So we use that mapping platform also to tell stories about what's going on in climate change. That's South Africa's INDCs for COP21. So this is a good example, I think, of how to use geojournalism to tell both scientific data and journalism, and hopefully to make it more accessible to people and to draw them into the topics that perhaps otherwise they might not read about.
Thank you, Fiona. And now we're going to shift from Africa over to the Himalaya Hindu Kush, where we're going to learn about a platform called the Third Pole. And if you're not familiar with the term, it's called that because the Himalaya Hindu Kush is the third largest store of fresh water in the world after the North Pole and the South Pole. And here to talk about it is Ramesh Bhushal.
Thank you, James. As James told that the third pole is also the reserve of the ice mass after the North and South Pole. So we came all the way from, I came all the way from Mount Everest. It's good to see you all here. Yeah, I mean, the first thing that we wanted to try with the data was like, to see how the scientists see us actually. So we decided to go and say, hey, give us the data. The first part was unlocking the data is the most important thing in the world now. There is a huge, huge amount of data, but it's locked. And then you can't reuse the raw data set that you want, in the system that you want to say to people in a very simplified way. So we decided to go to the partners and say, hey, give us the data sets. And they say, no, you can't get it. Everything is public. Oh, there's a scientific paper. Go on, do it. But how do you translate to the newspapers, televisions, radios? It's a huge outlets that go every day in the system, and then you don't have the formats that allows you to translate those information. So we started from, it's true, cool. Okay, so we cover all this third pole in a way that we make topics, basins, and countries, and we work with journalists. We help them to do some data stuffs. We publish by ourselves, and also we give a platform to them to publish, and also they publish on their own media outlets. So how do you work it then? The first question was unlocking the data. So we thought like, this is the video that we produced through the map. So what we do is like, we gather information from all the partners, we sign the agreement with them, and then say, we reuse it. So first of all, we aggregate data and we translate it. For example, I need to show a river flowing down from Mount Everest to the Ganges and then up to Bangladesh. And I want to see the whole river that flows down. I want to embed a story and then put it down and show people to see that, hey, this flows down this way. But I need save files. And you don't give me. You give me PDF files. So how do you translate them? It's a big question for a person who is a journalist and he wants to do data stories. So we created a platform which translates the data into various formats. For example, if you have zip files, it goes to the JPEG, PDF, GeoJSON, KML, CSV, and various formats. So that is what the first thing that we try to do is like simplify the information to the people who generate information for the larger audiences. That was the first part we did it. So it was very hard to get into the system because there's so many laws and bylaws that doesn't allow you to get data sets and reproduce it. But you can't buy the data sets as a journalist or media houses because even they are so much into a problem of this financial crisis and all those things. So the most important part is gathering this information, trying to reproduce it, and bringing it into platform. So we did it that way. And then we succeeded in a year and a half because they didn't even sign the agreement with us to say that you will give the public data to us to use. So I had to go like 1.5 years to all the partners to say that we will use this data, but give us the partnership later. And my job was to go again and again say, we use data. And that we did it in around 1.5 years, and we got like 10 partners there. So how do you do it? And what is the value of aggregation data? The first part is you generate information, you gather information, and then you disseminate to a person or people, a community, who reuse it. The second is we produce a huge number of stories, and we all geotag, geolocate stories. And then you click in a map there that is produced, and you want to see, like, in the last 10 years, 10,000 stories about Ganges where stories were in media outlets, but you don't see the perspective because sometimes you see floods, sometimes you see landslide, but if you can go in a map and just click Nepal and then get like 10,000 stories published and then see how the scenario was, it is a fantastic moment to analyze the perspective, national, regional, global perspective. So we do like, we geolocate data and then we just, publish it and make a kind of map. So we embed all these things in a map. So what does it mean then? It was the first question was unlocking the data. The second was understanding data. The third was uncovering the data. And fourth was translating and sending to a people who really want to understand what it means. So it has a relation with the journalist because journalists are the people who can translate the information. And we always try to blame you guys who are scientists saying you don't understand us. And you blame us because we don't understand you. So we can be, this GeoJournalism platform can be a kind of platform where you understand us and we understand you. Thank you.
Yes, Ramesh's official title is Director of the Third Pole Network, but I think his unofficial title should be Data Wrangler because that's what he spends a lot of his time doing. Next, we're going to move over to Indonesia. into the equatorial platform. Call up Clara Rondonuwu to talk about that. They definitely have the coolest logo, I think. Come on up.
Hello everyone, it's a pleasure to be here today to discuss about geojournalism and how we in Equatorial takes the lesson learned from Gustavo and adapts the platform to Indonesia context. So the sites focus on oceans, forests, and disaster in Indonesia. It was launched in January 2014 as a collaboration between the Earth Journalism Network and the Society of Indonesia Environmental Journalists. And we use the methodology of geojournalism to combine storytelling with data visualization in order to contextualize the events. So here, this is the current forest fires. Peat fires happen in Indonesia between May to end of October. So during the heavy haze from forest fires that lift pollutions to 20 times beyond safe level, we send journalists to cover, because if you see at the top left, that's the from NASA satellite. There's not, we cannot see even the Borneo Island. You cannot see what's under the smoke, how many hotspots, because at that time, I think there's only one hotspot for Palangkaraya, and on top right is the data, PM10 data, air quality data from BMKG, that's our Bureau for Meteorology, Climatology, and Geophysics, where they shut off the device to track PM10, to read the PM10. When it just peaked, they just shut it off. In many cities, it happened just like this. Also in Pekanbaru, Palangkaraya. So we send journalists, and you can see on at that day, there's like a brownish smoke in Palangkaraya. The visibility is less than 50 meters, and there's also orangutan school that should reduce their activities because the heavy smoke, and there's children still at school because the government kept denying that something happened on ground. So we just want to see who live under this thick smoke and exposed to 3,000 micrograms of per cubic meter dust, people as well as the wildlife. So equatorial take a network approach to journalism. So we created a syndication relationships with websites throughout Indonesia to aggregate their stories and distribute them to global audience. One of example of how we do this is with partnership with Global Forest Watch. So Equatorial published a stream of local stories on this global platform so that people using the site can get the news directly from people who understand what is happening on the ground, because that is their life experience. Journalists in this regard are participating in a system where data from satellite is being verified from the ground through storytelling. This is our latest attempt to do in-depth stories of 5 places with terrible conflicts because of land tenure and palm oil expansions. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. So you've heard now about 5 of our regional geojournalism sites, and now we're going to talk about a global platform that's been created, and actually it's just being launched this weekend. It's called Open Earth, and here to talk about it is our digital media guru, Willie Schubert. Please come on up, Willie.
Thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to see so many here. Very exciting. You know, and I'm also really honored to be able to speak with my colleagues and friends up here on this panel, because I would just like to say my role and my job is focused on supporting storytellers like these to get articles, local realities from people living closest to environmental change to global audiences who can actually make decisions that impact lives in our interconnected planet. This is the story series, by the way, the start of it. I welcome you to go see it. And you may have been asking, before you came here, you know, what is geojournalism? Because it is a new field, we hope. And you've seen many manifestations of it at local levels, different places, different people, using this technique to explore the big picture reality and how it connects to their local lives. And so, just to clarify, you know, we're using place-based storytelling and data visualization to contextualize events within the broader patterns of change. And the reason that we're doing this, and especially here at this Paris summit, is that the world is facing a planetary transformation. And identifying these patterns of change across regions is going to be key for our ability to identify and respond to these cascading crises represented by environmental land use change or landscape change, thinking about landscape at a global level, to take the hashtag, think landscape. So this is the first prototype site, and all of Open Earth. And what we're doing here is streaming stories from each of these global platforms to one common repository. So we're becoming a community that shares a method, shares a technology, and is increasingly discussing how do we describe the world we see around us so that we can identify what it is that we value. So with this tool, you can search all of the various stories. It just drives you to each of the sites. We've talked about a lot of different sites. You can filter all those stories. Right now we're looking at water-related stories. And increasingly what this site is focused on is building a kind of qualitative overlay on various Earth observation data, so that the work that you are all doing to create Earth observation and environmental data, we can then provide that qualitative layer that says you should be really looking at this, and where your data doesn't reach in terms of its scale or its resolution, actually there are people, talented people all over the world, capable of telling that story from a local perspective, that video, that picture, that interview with someone who's actually facing the realities of environmental change. And so right now we're looking at the increase in the number of stories. Right now there's about 6,000 across all the various platforms that are sharing this type of technology. And it's not just about sharing technology, about sharing our methodologies. So geojournalism.org is our website that we use to provide training, because our job ultimately is to help build our knowledge and our skill, our professional skills for communicating environmental changes, because there is no one story that's going to tell the big picture about this transformation. It's going to be a collective effort. And I hope that this approach and these websites demonstrate that as a media community around the world, we have come together to tell the stories of the most vulnerable, the places under the largest threats, so that we can highlight these pressures and respond to them at a global level. And you know, part of this event and part of this launch and part of our being here is, and the lesson of what Ramesh was talking about gathering data, working with groups like ICIMOD and IWMI, the International Water Management Institute, is that scientists and researchers have a huge amount of knowledge that exists already, but is not so easily shared, and that we have an opportunity right now in this moment here in Paris and beyond to be open with our information, to be open and in acknowledgement of these stresses, because cascading crises is something that affects us all. And so the other piece of this launch of Open Earth is the creation of a system of a network of websites that all share this common approach, and the ability to create these websites very similar to like WordPress.com. Like, you just give us the name of the website and an email address, and you can create these new geojournalism sites, because what we're hoping in the next few years is that we really start to scale to more regions, to more places. The network map that James showed at the beginning of all the journalists who are engaged around environmental topics, that they're also starting to share their information in a way that connects this crisis from the earth to the sky, from right down to people's daily lives, the local manifestations of this transformation. So that's it for today. Really excited about questions, and hopefully you have some. So thank you.
Thank you to all our panelists for keeping their comments relatively brief. So we are going to turn it over to you now we welcome your questions. We ask you to state who you are and your affiliation. And before we take questions, I just want to emphasize something that Willie mentioned, which is that as we continue to develop this Geo WordPress theme, it is becoming ever easier to build these platforms. And it is now so that someday you, without necessarily paying big bucks to hire developers, can perhaps build your own site, or at least work with us or work with other people to build sites that combine online maps with visualized data and stories. So that is our goal, is to continue making this easier and cheaper for journalists and everyone else to communicate the stories that define our times. So, do we have any questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm journalism and I'm a geographer from the University of Arizona. And in the Open Earth site, it said collaboration of journalists, NGOs, and bloggers. And it didn't say anything about the role of universities. And I was thinking particularly with this sort of GIS database, I would have thought there would be an awful lot of students who might be willing to help with the mapping platform. And I wondered how you were going to connect to universities all around the world that have a lot of students looking at ways to use GIS and other skills.
I'll pass on for really, but I have a concrete example where I showed that research we did with indigenous citizen scientists, which was that was a part of the research of anthropologists in the Rio Negro of Brazil, so you actually engage with them. And the other one is, another thing that is actually happening here, that because we invite you all to go to our booth, we're having a booth to showcase our platforms in the landscape laboratory. There was a lot of scientists and students that came to us like, wow, I just did this paper. Can we publish this paper with you? Can we transform this data and publish with you? I was like, yes, please. Because that's what's happening. We're getting actually demands of students or PhD who wants to see their data reach more people. And I think this is actually even a model for us, like a business model without being greedy, but it's like we're doing partnerships to help them to communicate their data. I see it in that fashion.
Yeah, I mean, we have also collaborated with the university in Nepal as well. So, I mean, we're so happy to be part of the university where when we can discuss about it and then think about it. Most often, like, you know, we don't have that ability, so we welcome you.
Yes, Nick.
It's okay, yeah. I'm Nikki Martinez from Global Canopy Program. I've been a long time observer of your work, and I just want to, and friend, and I just want to compliment you. It's been a while since I've been in touch, and this is just unbelievable progress. And you always did unbelievable work, but this is taking it to a new level, so thank you all. Just on the data side, I mean, the Data Wrangler and others, you know, as NGOs, we also use these data sources. We also have trouble getting them directly for advocacy work. And it just feels like we need some kind of, you know, exchange of data that is public that we're all using. And I just wonder if you're using any standards or open data standards, because you're presenting open processed information, which in your case is stories. But what about the data behind? And how can we share that effectively? And then I have a second small question about curation. I mean, if many people are enabled to produce many platforms, how do you then curate in the center so that it's still powerful and effective? Because you might get a lot of information even though there's a filtration coming underneath.
Yeah, sure. I'll take the second question first in terms of the curation question. And I think that the panelists here spoke to different ways to utilize these platforms, some of which is based upon aggregation. And there is a certain amount of, you know, picking out the signal in the noise by using some of these filters to say, we're going to create a more standardized taxonomy across all of these sites and a standardized process for having an API of all these stories, which is how the Open Earth site streams all of those in, and also Global Forest Watch utilizes, and they filter for forest subjects and then show stories from people, you know, living in Kalimantan about, you know, those maps in Kalimantan, so that those businesses and those policymakers and analysts who are using that site to build their knowledge get stories from people who are living there as a key priority. So one of the processes for building these kinds of things is having a few things that are standardized and also approaches for how they are decided upon in a collective way. So over the past week, all of these editors and we've been talking about how do we describe the topics that we cover. And if we're going to, like in the future, link those types of things to streams of real-time data, which is clearly the next step, is how we utilize and create what we're thinking of as data-driven discovery of articles. That there's something that appears in real-time data and that triggers the need to say, you should look at this thing, and here's all the articles that come from this place that give you the background to show you what are you looking at in this real-time information. So I think that we hope to create an initiative around this, and we've talked with a few potential partner organizations, including WRI, who we're already working with, the Earth Institute at Columbia University, and Future Earth from ICSU, and the UN Global Pulse, in terms of people who are first thinking about this same kind of thing at the same time to start developing some standards, but they're also attached to the larger communities like the Group on Earth Observation, and it has to be a systemic approach. But I think what we're demonstrating here is that as journalists, we have a role to play, and we're open to how that plays out. Yeah.
Does anyone want to tackle that first question about how do we share open data better?
So the first thing is like, you know, how to share better is how willing you are to share. So the first question comes is, you know, the willingness to share is, you know, increasing definitely, but it has to increase more. and then there should be a flexibility. I mean, you produce your data, definitely yes. There's a hard amount of pressure and all the work that you do, and then you also worry that those things I produced aren't in the mass, which means that you created information, but you don't bother about how to disseminate it. So while you create it, you also should have to think about now how we disseminate this system or the process kind of thing. So what I think is, we need to simplify the information while it is generated. For example, what I'm saying is, in many times, for example, many scientists doesn't share these SAFE files. They give the PDF files. So why don't we try to give the SAFE files to all the people who can then start up saying, or kind of visualizing things in a way and reproduce it, So I think we need to think about that way, and then we need to be more open to discuss about it and about the sharing of the information.
Yeah, let's take a few questions because we only got limited time. So here, Jessica, and these three first. Please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I edit a website called EcoBusiness, which is headquartered in Singapore but covers Asia Pacific. I'm really curious that as media and platform owners and operators, how do you measure the effectiveness of your platforms? Because it's one thing to have the data and to write these geojournalism stories, but how is it distributed? Do you reach mainstream media? Does mainstream media pick it up? Do you measure your stories by number of hits? I'll be really interested to find that out.
Measuring effectiveness. Okay, behind you. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Megan from Cool Earth, a UK-based organisation that works with Indigenous communities on the front lines of climate change and deforestation. So from that perspective, there are many communities facing adverse climate effects who have perhaps alternative or culturally specific ways of storytelling, or perhaps non-literate societies. And I was wondering if the panel had any thoughts about how to creatively address the challenges of properly representing those stories without removing the agency from the people who are trying to tell them.
Hi, I'm Lauren Kastner. I'm a freelancer based in Indiana in the United States. My question is actually similar to the woman from Singapore in terms of effectiveness, but actually for those of you who are doing more of the investigative journalism, how do you know that you're moving the needle with this approach to storytelling, and what impacts, especially I'm curious about the conflicts in South Africa and the rhino poaching. Are you moving the needle and moving towards your goal of being investigative?
Fiona, you want to answer that last one?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of ways to monitor and evaluate your impacts in terms of social media. I mean, you've got Google Analytics, and I mean, the data wranglers and the techies here could probably give you better input in terms of how to actually put figures to the impact that you have. In terms of investigative journalism, it's a lengthy process, and sometimes I do wonder whether we're not raising greater awareness and at the same time creating more of a problem. I mean, the rhino story hasn't got any better since it's been given so much attention. Poaching worldwide, trafficking, smuggling worldwide seems to be getting worse and worse, and yet we are definitely creating greater awareness in terms of a global scale, and the way that I monitor that is just in terms of the uptake of the kind of stories. I think often the people in this room pioneer new methods of telling stories and new topics, and there's a great satisfaction in seeing that those are taken up by other media, but in terms of actually monitoring it in figures, maybe somebody else wants to answer that question.
So in terms of audience, I think if we're talking about numbers, I would say that I can say for InfoAmazonia, which is the oldest of these platforms, is not huge, but we've found a way which we bet from the beginning to increase this, which is distributing the stories and the maps as data. So that thing that was showing on Ramesh's presentation, the share a map tool, we call it like a distribution widget. We created on the very first piece of the technology, and we still believe that this is going to be an important piece of what we do, because we distributed the same widget over all technology, which allows everyone goes there and customize their maps, which means like you creating a map which is like a YouTube video, and that anyone can embed on their websites, and it still can track the audience. Well, this is enough? No, it's not enough. So what we do is we go to mainstream media, and we do depend on them yet a lot, and try to plant the stories there. So like, look, I have a 30 years map of deforestation. Why are you doing a map of deforestation? You don't need it, you have mine. I have 10 years of forest data. You don't need to spend a whole week trying to figure out what I already have figured out. And it has been working. So we have the partnership with the biggest media portal, news portal of Brazil. And every time they pick up one of our stories, it's like the audience of the month. It's great. But there is the fact that I think Fiona is bringing about impact, going to the other question, which is we can create impact by creating our reputation. So the story that we did about the deforestation budget, it was published as a headline of the main newspaper of Brazil, and that's why the Minister of Environment get mad with us. I consider that success. Just going. So just before going to another opinions, I just want to respond to the indigenous question. Can I? So I think it's a great question because I've been working. I started more on the conservation side, protected areas, wildlife, and going much more now working with the indigenous agenda, let's say, of forests. And it's amazing. My question is exactly like this. There's so much richness on the way of we can communicate the knowledge and the things that are going on in indigenous territories that pose this challenge to us, how we actually can make them speak for themselves. So a few things is like that, the calendar that I just showed, but I'm thinking a lot about the richness of oral tradition that exists in indigenous territories, and lucky us that the word today is very much oral, like we like video above any other thing. So I think that's a conjunction of formats, actually.
No, I'm just going to add a couple of points with respect to the overall M&E metrics of measuring the website's effectiveness and all of that. We all know that, right? And we all know from how many number of people would visit you per day, per week, and that sort of thing. We all know that, and we can look at that versus your target and then say whether you're doing well or not. But we also have just the basic empirical evidence that a minister in Central Africa, for instance, organizes a press conference as a result of a story he finds on InfoCongo with respect to blood diamond in the country. That to us is impact, right? I don't know how else you would interpret that. But I think there's also the overall thing of coming from a KM background where there's this whole thing about first loop, second loop, third loop learning, right? Where you can also say there's a first, second, third loop impact. So some things, yes, as journalists, we just want to have the impact right away, right? It's always a day-to-day thing. But some of it measures across years, right? And I think we ought to also have the long-term sort of perspective when we think about this.
I want to squeeze in a few more questions if we can. Any final questions? Yes, in the back here.
Yes, my name is Joe Sherman. I'm here for Occupy.com. I have a question that relates to a couple of issues brought up here a couple of minutes ago, excuse me, and that is the blend of this, you know, the media is the message, streaming, digital, big brain, full of info, but often not emotionally responsive. My own experience has found that the people that often really lead are not all that moved intellectually. They've had something emotional, something really powerful in their own life to make them become a leader and then start looking at this stuff. So my question is, where do you go from what you're doing, which I think is important, it's meaningful, to ally with back more to like the community stuff? You want info from communities, villages, people that are on the front. How do you bring it back there so it's maybe real life there as well? It's not all digital, because the digital world, I find, and I use it all the time like probably everyone else in this room, I find it is often lax in the final push to make people really active. Thank you.
Well, I don't know if anyone else wants to. I'd just say this is far from the only approach that we use. We certainly work with a lot more traditional media and And this is something we often grapple with, which is that information, not just digital, but any kind of information, it's necessary, but it's not sufficient. And you need more. Sometimes you need passion, you need emotion, you need, you need to touch people's feelings too. And a good journalist can do that and still, have good, factual, accurate data as well. And I mean, it's not always easy, but we certainly value that as well. So I think we recognize the same need as you do. Can we get one more question maybe before we wrap up? No? Nobody? Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Giordano Cossu. I'm an independent journalist and member of the Earth Journalism Network. And it's actually to close the loop, because there have been a few questions on that. It's also about economic sustainability. I mean, for your projects, are you depending mostly on funding from organizations, and I know some, of course, or as Gustavo mentioned, about when content goes onto mainstream media, does that involve exactly revenues that support then the work of journalists? And I would like some of you at least to answer to this. Thank you.
Anyone want to address that?
No, I'm just going to say that, of course, it's an issue that we grapple with almost every single day. And, of course, at some point when you begin to take the analysis to another level, then you begin to ask, first of all, does this guarantee our independence if USAID is going to be funding us across the next 10 years? So I think the sustainability model at some point is give it back to the journalists to do just pure journalism, right, where you have all your independence and that sort of thing. So, yes, for now, of course, it's James, it's EJN, it's with all the Oak Foundation and all the other people funding us, but I think the long-term trajectory ought to go in the direction of really having this become purely an independent thing, so that we can then, function within the parameters of real journalism, right?
Yeah, James, I just want to answer her question, saying, how do you monitor it? The first, thing is, we feel that, a lot of people come to us saying, I want to go to geojournalism, I want to do data journalism in the newsroom, which is very traditional. So the more we get interest, we think that they want it. So that is one of the things that we are feeling, that a lot of people are coming to us and saying, what can I do? So it is a kind of major shift kind of thing in the newsroom that is very traditional. The second thing is like, yes, we just got published by Guardian last week about the mineral water that is in a bottle in Tibet. And then many people think that water from the Himalayas is very, very pure, and then all the water companies are trying to just grab water from there, and it was quite interesting, and then they picked it up. And also we are taken by the Dawn in Pakistan, and then it got like 5, 10,000, 15,000 hits kind of thing as well. So, we're not afraid that media don't use us, but we also feel that we are building a community which also wants to dive into this whole pool of the data and then try to generate something better for the audiences.
I'll just wrap up by answering that funding question, which is certainly true. We are predominantly grant funded. We have the projects mentioned here are funded by several different organizations, including the Oak Foundation, of course, and the Skoll Global Threats Fund, Climate Knowledge Brokers, USAID, and there are others involved. But so is that sustainable? I think traditionally we'd say no, that's not sustainable, but there are more and more people interested in getting this data up and out and getting stories out. And I think nonprofit media might be more viable and more long-lasting than we give it credit for. So yes, we'd love to get a kind of more market-based model. The fact is, it's very hard to sell content these days. Very hard. There are lots of organizations trying to do it. Advertising just doesn't pay the bills right now. People are still exploring different models, but I think some kind of mix of nonprofit funding and for-profit. And maybe we're not just selling content. We're selling services. We're selling data. We're selling visualized data, These are all different kinds of services that we could be marketing and selling in addition to just stories. Okay. So thank you very much, everyone, for your attention. And thanks again to the panelists. We're happy to talk about this in more detail. Please come up and feel free to talk to any of us and engage in the corridors. Thank you.